everyone! Welcome to the Jayda and Stitches show, and happy summer! For me, nothing says summer quite like a brand new, adorable purse. And today, we have the perfect confectionery accessory for you. We are going to show you how to make our cupcake purse. Today's purse is going to be made using 24/7 cotton by Lion Brand yarns, and we'd like to thank Lion Brand for sponsoring today's video. We're going to put a link to Lion Brand in the description box and in the pinned comment down below, so you can pop over and check out all of the colors that 24/7 cotton comes in. I used pink for my paper and white for my frosting, but there are so many pretty colors, you're going to have trouble deciding what colors you want to make your cupcake out of. Or is that flavor? The 24/7 cotton is 100% cotton. It's mercerized, which gives it this really smooth, shiny texture, and it's a size 4 yarn. So it's perfect for projects like this. Today's tutorial is going to show you how to make our cupcake, and we're even going to talk about some optional ways that you can decorate it. I'll even show you how I've added some beads to my particular little cupcake frosting. So let's grab our yarn, we'll grab our hooks, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up a little cupcake purse together. In order to make our cupcake purse, we're going to be using size 4 medium weight 100% cotton yarn. I'm using 24/7 cotton by Lion Brand in pink and white. You're going to want around 50 yards per color, 2 colors in total. One color is for the paper or the bottom of your cupcake, and the other color is for the top or the frosting part of your cupcake. So 50 yards per color. You want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, a stitch marker may be handy for this project. We're using a 4.5mm hook, also known as a 7, and decorating the top of your cupcake is completely optional. I'm going to be using a needle and thread and some pretty glass beads. You can also use sequins or other little crocheted doodads if you want to add a little bit of interest. And I'm going to be adding a little crocheted berry to the top as well. Our written pattern includes the pattern for this little strawberry, and if you're a Silk or Vicuña member of our channel, there's also a tutorial on this little strawberry for you guys as well. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. We're going to begin at the very bottom of our cupcake, and we're going to make the bottom of the cupcake paper. So we're going to start with our paper color. I'm using pink for that. And we want to begin with a cinch circle. So the bottom of our cupcake is made in the round. It's one big circle. We've got 9 rows of increasing ahead of us, and the circle is based on a foundation of 6 stitches. So once you've got your cinch circle made, we're going to work 6 single crochet into the bottom, or I should say into this circle, working over top of that little short tail. This is the very center of the bottom of our bag. Once you've got 6 single crochet worked into that circle, grab the short tail, pull it nice and tight. That cinches everything up. And because we're working in the round, we're going to begin row 2 in what was the first stitch of row 1. We are not joining our rows with a stitch or a slip stitch. We are just continuing to work ever increasing in the round. Every first stitch of the next row begins in what was the first stitch of the row before. We are using the single crochet stitch, so I'm going to work over top of my short tail. That first stitch is always a little tight. I'm going to get my hook in there. There we go. All right, here we go. 2 single crochet in the first stitch of row 2, and 2 single crochet in each of the next 5 stitches. So 2 single crochet in each stitch from row 1. We'll go from 6 stitches to 12 stitches. At the end of row 2, you'll have 12 stitches. I'm still working over my little short tail, but I'm kind of cinching it up a little bit as I go, and that keeps the bottom nice and tight and small. We are going to begin our next row in the first stitch of what was row 2, and as you start to spin outwards, you might find it easier to use a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of each row. And this is how I would do that. Into the first stitch, to begin row 3, we're going to work 2 single crochet. After I work the first 2 stitches of the first row or the next row, I go back, grab my stitch marker, and I mark the first stitch, which is the first of those 2. And I just sort of pinch it to the outside edge so that it doesn't really interfere with me as I'm working. So I know that this little marked stitch is stitch number 1 of row 3, and when I get all the way back around, I know that I've completed a row. To continue with row 3, into the next stitch, we're going to single crochet once, and that's the pattern. 2, 1, 2, 1. You're going to repeat that 6 times in total. We've already done it once, so we need to do it 5 more times, and we'll go from a stitch count of 12 up to a stitch count of 18. I've just worked stitch number 18. That's the last stitch of row 3, and I know that because A, I have 18 stitches all the way around, and B, I've come all the way back up to that marked stitch, which was the first stitch of row 3. So I take my stitch marker out. I know that I'm beginning row 4. We're going to continue increasing now, and row 4's increase pattern is 2 single crochet into the first stitch, single crochet into each of the next 2, and you repeat that 6 times. In order to move my stitch marker, I work the first 2 stitches of the row, pause, grab my stitch marker, and just mark the first one. So I know that's the first stitch of the row. Now I can continue on with my little increase pattern of 2 stitches, 1 and 1, 2 stitches, 1 and 1, using the single crochet all the way around. And if I lose track of how many stitches I've done, I at least won't lose track of where stitch number 1 is for the 4th row. At the end of row 4, you'll have 24 stitches, or 4 rows times a base of 6, that's 24. You also know that you've done 4 rows by counting. Here's the middle row, which is the center, row 2, row 3, and row 4. And of course I know I'm complete because that was the first stitch of the row I had marked with my stitch marker. Row 5, we continue with the increase pattern. 2 single crochet into the first stitch of the set, and a single crochet once into each of the next 3. So 2, 1, 1, 1. You repeat that 6 times all the way around. Remember to mark the first stitch of your row so you know where you are. And 5 times 6 is 30. So at the end of row 6, you'll have 30 stitches. At the end of row 5, we have 30 stitches. We're going to continue now. Row 6 begins with 2 single crochet into the first stitch. Pause to replace your stitch marker so you can keep track of where you are. And then it's 1 single crochet into each of the next 4 stitches. So 2 single crochet into the first stitch of the set, single crochet into each of the next 4, repeat that 6 times in total, and you'll be up to 36 stitches. At the end of row 6, we have 36 stitches. For row 7, we continue with the increase pattern. That's 2 single crochet into the first stitch, and a single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. Continue to repeat that 6 times in total, all the way around for row 7, and we'll be up to 42 stitches at the end of row 7. At the end of row 7, we have 42 stitches. We're continuing to increase into row 8. The row 8 increase pattern is 2 single crochet into the first stitch and a single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. You'll repeat that 6 times in total, and at the end of row 8, we'll be up to 48 stitches. At the end of row 8, we've got 48 stitches. And we've got one more row of increase to do. Row 9, we're going to single crochet into the first 2 stitches of the row and a single crochet into each of the next 7 stitches. So 2 into the first stitch, 1 into each of the next 7 stitches. Still remembering to move my stitch marker to the first stitch of each row as I go. And at the end of row 9, we'll be up to 54 stitches. At the end of row 9, we have 54 stitches. We're We're just going to even up the bottom of our little circle now by single crocheting into each of the next 9 stitches once. This isn't going to change our stitch count, it's just going to even up the circle of our cupcake paper bottom. So single crochet once into each of the next 9 stitches. There you go. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch and fasten off. That is the bottom of our little cupcake purse. And depending on your tension and the thickness of the yarn you're using, it will vary in size a little bit, but gauge is not super important for this pattern. We do, however, want to leave a nice long tail for sewing, because we're going to sew the bottom of our cupcake paper, which is this, to the bottom of our actual paper, which we're going to create next. So leave yourself a nice long sewing tail of yarn, maybe 60 centimeters or 24 inches, somewhere in that neighborhood. And you can put this piece aside. We're moving on to the side of the bottom of the cupcake now, and this is the part of the cupcake paper which has got sort of a ridged effect. In order to build that, we're going to start with a slip knot, still using our cupcake paper color, or in my case, pink. And we're going to chain 13 to begin. Once you have 13 chains, you're going to skip the first chain from the hook, single crochet into the next chain, and single crochet into each chain all the way across. So we're still using single crochet. At the end of row 1, you'll have 12 single crochet. For every row hereafter in this little part of the paper pattern, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and we're using the back loops only. So the back loop, remember to always skip your turning chain, is the furthest loop of the stitch away from you. Single crochet as normal into that back loop only. You're going to use the back loops only of every single stitch all the way across, continuing to single crochet. At the end of row 2, you'll have 12 stitches, and you're going to repeat this row until you get to row 54. So chain 1, turn at the end of every row, back loops only, single crochet in each stitch across, chain 1, turn, and continue. You want 54 rows in total of back loops only, single crochet. The last stitch in the row is sometimes a little bit pulled down the edge, so don't miss it. If you're not sure, pause, count up your stitches to make sure you still have 12. We're going to be creating a nice little ridged pattern. This is what back loops only single crochet does for us. Chain 1, turn, always skip your turning chain, find the back loop of each stitch and single crochet across. Back and forth until you have 54 rows. Once you've single crocheted back loops only for 54 rows in total, and it's fairly easy to count, you can count your rows individually by finding the first row and then knowing that the second row sort of sits up and then the third row sits in and the fourth row sits up, or lay it flat in front of you so that your first row lies flat on the bottom and the ridge is the second row, and just count the ridges 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so on. And you should have 54 rows in total. We're going to seam it up now. So we're going to chain 1, we're going to bring the 2 short ends together, and we're going to continue to use the back loops only. We're going to skip the turning chain, find the back loop of the first stitch and the corresponding foundation chain row across from it, and slip stitch through the pair. And this is what's going to create a seam. Grab the back loop of the next stitch, the corresponding foundation chain row, and slip stitch. And the next one, and slip stitch, and the next one, and slip stitch. You're going to do this all the way down. You'll have a total of 12 slip stitches in your seam. Your last slip stitch will be the back loop only of your last stitch, and what was the first chain you made in your foundation chain row. There's your little tail from the very beginning, and that seams up our paper edging. So that's the little paper edging. Now we're going to work a finishing row around the bottom and the top, or the top and the bottom, however you want to look at it. Right from where we are, we're going to grab our yarn. We're going to chain one, and we're going to single crochet in the edge of each row all the way around. So we're going to skip the foundation chain row or the seam, but we're going to just pick up a loop in the edge of each row all the way around. And it's easy to kind of pick the same place every single time. So maybe you grab the loop that's at the edge of one row, and then when you get to a ridge, maybe grab the loop that's right next to it. Doesn't matter if these single crochets are fairly close. I'm working over my short tail, but you don't have to. And then the same thing next to it. So there's a loop at the top of the third row, and then I'm going to grab the loop right next to it for the fourth row. And then the next two rows, there's the loop there, and the loop right next to it. And this way, by working in sort of looking at two rows at once, I know I won't miss any. And I want 54 single crochet all the way around the top edge, or the bottom edge, we're going to do both, at the end of this little finishing row. So that number is very important. You want to make sure you have 54 single crochet, one for each row edge, all the way around. Once you've single crocheted into the edge of each of those 54 rows, there's your last one, you're going to reach across the seam, find the top of the first single crochet you made, and slip stitch to join the row. You can fasten off and weave that little tail in. You can do it now or you can do it later. You're going to flip it over and you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. So we've got a nice finishing row around the bottom, a nice finishing row around the top. We're going to start with a slip knot on our hook, still using the same color. We're going to find our seam, find the first row next to it, join our yarn with a single crochet, so make sure that loop's on your hook. Slip your hook through a loop at the edge of the first row. I'm going to work over top of my short tail. Pick up a loop, so you've got both loops on your hook, and single crochet. And just like the other side, you're going to single crochet. Try to identify two rows at the same time, always placing your stitches in the same place. That just kind of helps to keep track of where you are. So I'm going to use this loop here. This will be row 3. And the loop right next to it. One single crochet per row edge all the way around. You want to make sure you've got 54 stitches, just like the top, when you get back to the seam. Once you have 54 single crochet all the way around, that's one per row edge, you're going to join with a slip stitch to the first single crochet you made. That's where you joined your yarn. Fasten off and weave in your tail. And if you haven't woven in the tail from the other side, take a moment to weave them both in now. Once you're sure that you've woven in all your tails, you can take your little paper and flip it right side out. And if you prefer the other side, you can use that too. So neither side is correct, but you want to use the side that you think looks the most sort of, I guess, even or papery. So whichever side works for you, I'm going to flip mine inside out. Then You're going to decide which is going to be the top, which is going to be the bottom. So which side do you like best for the bottom? Grab the bottom part of your little cupcake, take that long tail you left behind, thread it up on your yarn needle, and you're going to sew through each of the 54 sets of stitches all the way around to attach it. So I like to join first stitch sort of pair will be right next to where the seam was on my little paper and where my yarn finished. You're just going to use the whip stitch all the way around. So you're going to pair up each set of stitches and sew through it. And the whip stitch is an overlocking stitch. You're always going in the same direction. Your needle comes from the top through the bottom or from one side to the other. It's always the same direction. Not too tight, not too loose. And you're going to do all 54 sets of stitches all the way around. And that will sew the bottom of your cupcake paper onto the side of your cupcake paper. When I get all the way back around to the beginning, I like to go through the first set of stitches again, just to make sure that I don't have any little gaps. So I might go through the first set or the first two sets. Make sure there are no gaps all the way around. Then you can take your yarn and your yarn needle, poke it through to the inside, flip it inside out again. Knot, so just make a little tiny knot around a loop of some crochet. Make a little tight knot so that you know your little sewing yarn isn't going to go anywhere. Make it as tight as you possibly can. And then just like anything else, weave it in underneath, back and forth, some of the stitches around the bottom of your bag. We now have the bottom of a cupcake, our little cupcake paper, and we're going to build the rest of the cupcake onto this. So we're going to go to the cupcake frosting part now. So we're switching colors to our cupcake frosting color. For me, I'm using white. We're going to start with a slip knot. We're going to join our yarn with a single crochet. I like to start kind of back where my seam is. Find any stitch along the seam. So remember there's 54 single crochet around the top of your bag. Join with a single crochet and single crochet into each of those stitches all the way around. So you'll still have 54, but I'll tell you, if you end up with a few extra or one short, at this point the stitch count doesn't matter as much. So try to keep it to 54, which would be the same stitch count around the top of your bag or the top of the little cupcake paper. But if you start to kind of lose track or you wind up with a few extra or a few too few, don't worry, it's not a big deal. Once you've single crocheted in each stitch all the way around, you should have 54 or very close to it. You're not going to join your row with a slip stitch. We are going to be working the upper part of our frosting in the round, just like we did at the bottom. So we're going to work the successive rows stitches into the first stitch of each row going forward. No joining rows. So row 2 begins in row 1, right there in that first stitch. Single crochet into it. And you can do a couple of things. You can mark that first stitch just like we did when we worked the bottom with a stitch marker, so you always know when you cut back round to it that you've completed a row. I like to keep an eye on my seam. This is why I like to join my yarn right about here so that I have a visual indicator of how many times I've gone around. You can also just mark that little stitch marker below, somewhere below where you joined your yarn, just so you know that that's every time you get around, you've worked a complete row. We're going to be single crocheting in each stitch all the way around, no increasing, no decreasing. We're going to work 18 rows of just straight single crochet all together. So just plain old single crochet. Remember, we're not joining rows, we're just working into the first stitch of each row gets worked into the first stitch of what was the row before, round and around and around. And that helps us keep any sort of obvious seam from appearing. It looks nice and neat. And it's easy to count your rows. You're just counting single crochet rows. You want 18 in total. "18 rows of single crochet worked in the round looks like this." If you were keeping track with a stitch marker or your seam, then you can just count your rows up. Make sure you have 18. And now we're going to work a row of decrease just to close in the top a little bit. So row 19, we're going to work a little decrease pattern, and we're going to get our stitch marker handy again. We're going to begin with single crocheting 2 stitches together. So you pick up a loop in the next 2 stitches. You have 3 loops on your hook, you yarn over and pull back through all 3 loops. Then we're going to single crochet once into each of the next 3 stitches. But before I go too far, I'm just going to mark that single crochet 2 stitches together that we did to start, so I know that that's the first stitch of row 19. I'm going to complete that little set. So single crochet 2 stitches together, single crochet once into each of the next 3 stitches. There we go. And then repeat. Single crochet 2 stitches together, single crochet once into each of the next 3 stitches. So that little repeater is repeated 10 times total, and that's going to bring us down to a total of 44 stitches all the way around. At the end of row 19, we've sort of closed the top in a little bit. We're down to 44 stitches, and we're just going to finish off this row by slip stitching into the next stitch. So slip stitch to close the row, and now we're going to work a row of eyelet, and the eyelet row is the drawstring row. We're going to switch to the half double crochet stitch now. We're going to chain 2 to begin this row, and this chain 2 will count as a half double crochet stitch. Half double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and half double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, half double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. And this is the little repeater you're going to work all the way around. So you're working across sets of 4 stitches. Half double crochet into the first 3, chain 1 and skip the last stitch of the set, so stitch number 4. Half double crochet into the next 3, chain 1, skip 1, and so on. And this is going to create a nice little set of drawstring spaces all the way around the top of our bag. At the end of row 20, you're going to work your last 3 half double crochet, chain 1, skip to the top of your chain 2 that began the row, and join with a slip stitch to the top of it. That concludes our little drawstring row, or our eyelet row. So you should have a whole bunch of nice little chain 1 eyelets all the way around that you can weave your drawstring through. And now we're going to work a finishing row of single crochet. So we're going to chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in the same place that we joined in. Single crochet into the next 2 stitches, so right into the top of both of them. When you get to a chain 1 space, just single crochet right into the middle of it. Single crochet into the next 3 stitches, single crochet into the chain 1 space, and continue all the way around. You'll have 44 stitches, 44 single crochet at the end of this row. At the end of the row, you've got 44 stitches. You're going to skip, don't confuse that little tiny chain 1 there with a stitch. You want to find the first single crochet of the row and join with a slip stitch to it. So that was row 21. You should have 44 single crochet all the way around, and that will nicely finish off the top of our little cupcake bag. You can now fasten off, weave in that tail, but don't get rid of your white yarn just yet, because now we're going to put in a couple of cake frills all along the bottom here, just to make it look extra cupcakey. So here's our little cupcake bag so far. We want to add some frills to it. So what we're going to do is find the seam, or maybe what you would consider the back of the bag. Not that this is going to show. We're going to turn our bags so that the bottom is facing away from us. We're going to grab our frosting color. I'm still using white for that. Make a slip knot. We're going to join our yarn with a single crochet, and we're going to work around the surface of this first row of uppercase, or the frosting, the upper part of our cupcake. So you're going to join your yarn by just sticking your hook right through the fabric in and around the stitch. So you should see the little V, the upside down V, sitting on top of your hook or the post of the stitch. Grab that stitch, you're working around it. We're going to join our yarn with a single crochet. So you just pull back up a loop and single crochet. You can work over your tail or leave it out and work around it later. Might be easier if you've never done any sort of surface crocheting, just to leave it out to the back. And here we go. This is the little frill pattern we're going to repeat all the way around. Sometimes it might help to stop, pull your stitches apart so you can see the individual stitches. You're working around the stitches from this row. We're going to half double crochet around the next stitch. So you just slip your hook right underneath it and half double crochet. Here's the next stitch. We're going to double crochet twice around that stitch. So pick it up on your hook, work a regular old double crochet, and do it again in the same place. Chain one. And now we're going to go down the other side of the little scallop we're making. So around the next stitch, we're going to work 2 double crochet, a half double crochet around the next stitch. Remember, you can pull it apart if you need to see the stitch a little better. And around the next stitch, 2 single crochet. So 2 single crochet around that next stitch. I'm holding up this cupcake so that you can see what I'm doing, but you might find it very helpful to have this braced against your work surface or your lap while you're crocheting. And that is one little frill. You can sort of see that there. All right, that was the 2 single crochet. Let's continue. Around the next stitch, a half double crochet, 1 half double crochet. Around the next stitch, 2 double crochets. Again, you're slipping your hook right underneath it. The whole stitch comes up on top of your hook. You're at the top of this little frill. So if I do this, you can see that little frill. You're right at the top. Once you've worked your first 2 double crochets, chain 1. And then you're working down the other side of that little frill. So 2 double crochet around the next stitch. A half double crochet around the next stitch. And 2 single crochet around the next stitch. And that is it's 2 frills completed. So 2 single crochet, a half double crochet, 2 double crochet, chain 1, 2 double crochet, a half double crochet, 2 single crochet, and repeat. And you're going to work that little repeat all the way around that first row where that color changes. So you're working right around those really easy to see stitches, and you're going to repeat that all the way around. The last stitch you work is going to be a half double crochet. That brings you back to the first 2 single crochet you worked around that first stitch.
And you can join with a slip stitch to the top of that first single crochet to join the row. Go. That's your little edge frill. Now you can optionally add a second edge, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Passing off. You can weave in those two tails later if you like. I'm just going to pull them through to the inside of the bag for now. There we go. That gets them out of the way. And if you want to add a second row of frill, which I feel really helps make it look extra cakey, you're going to continue with this same frosting color, and we're going to repeat that first row of frosting, but we're going to stagger it so that the little frills, this little part here, they stick out in between. So where the dip of the first row of frill is, there will be the little bump of the scallop sitting from the second row. And we're going to do that worked around that first row of single crochet that we did along the edge of our paper. So that is the pink row in this case of single crochet just below this row here. And if you want your edges to, your frills to be sort of staggered, you're just going to move to the middle, so where there's a little hump in that frill there, you're going to join your yarn here. So join with a single crochet in the same stitch, so around the same stitch, and then you're going to repeat that pattern. So the next stitch is a half double crochet. Get your hook in and underneath that stitch, half double crochet, two double crochets around the next stitch, chain one, 2 double crochet around the next stitch, a half double crochet around the next stitch, and we're back to the beginning of that little repeater, 2 single crochet around the next stitch. And that is going to all work out mathematically exactly the same as the first row, but you'll see that that little fringe, that little ruffle, is going to sit opposite the first row. So you're going to have 2 sort of fluffy edges of frosting, and neither row will interfere with the other one. So you can go ahead and repeat that. This is optional, this second row of frosting fluff, but I really love the way it looks. The second frill row ends the same way that the first one did. Slip stitch to join at the first single crochet, fasten off, pull both ends through to the inside of the bag and weave them in there. And then of course you've got this cute little double frill all the way around the bottom of your frosting. Now that the purse is done, we have some finishing things to do. We want a drawstring that will also double as a strap. We want to make 2 of them. So I've just chained one here. I'm going to make a second one. Of course, you can use ribbon or cording for this. I recommend lengths of 90 centimeters or 36 inches each. 2. So 2 lengths of cord or ribbon in that measurement. And if you're going to make them like me, I'm using the same color as my frosting, which is white, but you can use any color you want. I like the fact that they're going to blend in with the frosting. Start with a slip knot, and I've chained 110. You can chain however many you want, depending on how long you want your drawstrings to be. Remember that the drawstring also functions as a purse strap. So if you want a short strap that just goes over your shoulder, or you want a longer one, I should say a short one that goes over your wrist or a longer one that goes over your shoulder, keep that in mind. Make the first one, maybe weave it through the drawstring eyelet row of your purse, cinch it shut, and see if it's long enough. If not, you can continue chaining. If it's too long, you can take a few chains out. Write down the final number of chains and make a second one. Once you've finished that little drawstring, however many chains you need it to be, count them up, make sure that you've got the number that you need, and also double check the number, just so if you're making a second one and it's not the same as 110 chains like I've done, you know to make it identical to the first. Pull that nice and tight, grab both those ends and trim down the little tails. You don't need much tail. And before we weave these in, I'm going to show you how I'm decorating my cupcake. First, if you're going to add a little sort of crocheted doodad, like this little berry or maybe a heart or a star or something else that you've crocheted that you just sort of want to have at the top, I like to actually sew it right to the top edge of the purse so that when the cupcake is all cinched shut, it sits right at the top. So I've threaded up the long tail left on my little crochet doodad. I'm going to pick one stitch along the top, and I'm just going to sew through a couple of little stitches at the top. And it doesn't matter what little thing you might be sewing on, you just want to grab a couple of stitches. Maybe it's the point of a star, maybe it's the top of a little heart, and you're just going, these things are very, very light, so you're just going to sew a few stitches in the exact same place. There isn't going to be much strain or pressure put on this little thing. So 2, 3, that's probably enough. That's all I can really fit. I'm going to make one tiny little knot. So I've sewn here 3 times. I'm going to make a tiny little knot now with my yarn at the side, just so that my sewing thread doesn't go anywhere. And then you can weave in a little bit through the same colored thing, or if it's a little 3-dimensional item like I've got here, you can just pull it right down into the middle of it and then trim off any excess. And then when you cinch up the top of your little cupcake, your little berry or your little decoration will sit right at the top. Okay, let's add some sprinkles. To add beads or sequins, I take a sewing needle, small enough that I know it'll fit through my beads or sequins. I double up my thread, so I cut a long length, pull it through and tie both ends together, so a nice little knot at the end. And then there's really no fine science to this. I like to knot my ends on the inside, so I grab a piece of loop of crochet. I'm making sure that I'm using a thread that's the same color as my frosting. Bring my needle through to the outside, and because I'm using little beads, I want to make sure that I'm putting the beads kind of on the loop of the crochet and not in between the spaces. So I grab a bead, thread it through my needle, and then I just go around the loop of the crochet. If I don't trust my thread, or I want to make sure that it's on extra safe, I'll do it twice. So I'll go through the whole of the bead twice, and I'll go through the little loop twice. That keeps my bead on the outside of my loop. Then I can carefully weave my tail, or my little yarn, my little thread, through some of the stitches. And I'll go through some stitches, taking care to not catch the thread on my little bead. And then maybe I'll come down here. I want to sort of randomly lay beads of the same color, kind of all over the place. I don't want them really in a row. I want them to look random. And I take my needle and thread through stitches, and I pull taut but not too tight to make sure that I'm not squeezing the bag. This also keeps my thread inside the yarn, not on the inside of the bag, but sort of working alongside the yarn itself. And then I can sew on another bead. Once again, I can just sort of do it once, or I can go through it twice if I want to make sure that it's on there nice and snug. And I'm sewing it to the loop of the crochet. And that keeps the bead on the outside. It keeps it from wanting to go in between the stitches. And then I will just take my time. This can take quite a while, especially if you really want to cover it in sequins and beads. And I will just continually randomly add pretty little beads of different colors. When I run out of thread, I'll knot my yarn or my thread on the inside, weave in whatever tail might be left, cut another length, and start over again. And I'm just going to continue that process until I have enough sprinkle coverage to suit me on my little cupcake purse. Once you've sewn on enough beads or sequins or whatever little extra bit of decoration you want, you can put in your drawstrings. We have two so that we can close it from side to side. So I like to find what I consider the back, which would be this, flip it over, and then weave one in from one side all the way around. And it doesn't really matter where you start it, but you want to weave it in and out through those nice large eyelet spaces we made. In and back out through the same hole that it went in. And just sort of grab both ends and try to even them up. There we go. Then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So this one starts and finishes here. The other one is going to start and finish here. Then you want to take the ends of one tie, so the tie that comes in and out in the same place, bring those little ends together, and you're going to knot them together nice and tight. Bring that knot right down to the very end and make it as tight as you possibly can. You want to do that on both sides. There we go. And now you can pull them to cinch it up nice and tight, and you've got your drawstrings knotted. It works as a little couple of straps too. And there is your little cupcake purse.
And there you go, a cupcake purse. We first added our cupcake purse pattern to our Etsy shop in 2015, and we've taken the opportunity to freshen it up a little and add a couple of photographs. So if you haven't yet checked out that pattern in our Etsy shop, please do so, because it's a cutie. And don't forget that it also includes that adorable little strawberry tutorial pattern in it as well. And another thanks to Lion Brand for sponsoring today's video. We love 24/7 cotton around here because it just makes everything look so pretty and shiny and polished. Look at that cupcake. It literally looks good enough to eat. We hope you enjoyed making this cupcake purse along with us today, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches Show. Till then, stay safe, stay crafty, and happy summer, everybody! Bye!
Hi, everybody. Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.